Hi, and welcome to my inaugural lecture as Professor of Public Archaeology for the Sussex College of Ancient and Classical Archaeology. So today my lecture is going to be on my 30-year career and some of the achievements. My first interest in archaeology was when I was a young boy, aged 8 or 9, in the back garden, playing with my toys, and I found a piece of pottery. I gave it to my father and he said, "Oh, that could be Victorian." So I was quite intrigued that there were these objects under the ground. So I dug a bit further and found a bottle, dug down a bit further, found some more pottery, dug a bit further and found this piece of red broken pottery and gave it to my father. He said, "Oh, that could be Roman." I thought, Roman? Who were the Romans? So I dived inside my house, got out the encyclopedias and thought, wow, the Romans in Britain. So I went back to the hole for another 2 days, thinking that I was going to dig up a Roman, a real live Roman, in the back of my home. So that was my first encounter of archaeology, and no, I never did find a Rome. So the next staging point of interest in archaeology came in 1983 when the BBC had a series called The Cleopatras, all about the Ptolemies in ancient Egypt. And I was quite intrigued in how elites treated each other in such a bad way for power. And it did give me a taste of ancient Egypt. My first trip to Egypt was in 1987. I landed in Luxor on a 2-week package with Hayes and Jarvis for £259. I went to Karnak Temple, Luxor Temple, the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, Dela Bakri, Medina Habu, the Ramesseum. Also went to Seti, the first mortuary temple, which nobody went to. It was just an empty place. And walked up in the Theban hills over the top of the escarpment, and then took an overnight bus up to Cairo to see the pyramids. Went to Giza, spent a couple of days in Giza, and then travelled out to the Siwa Oasis, which was an amazing experience to see the temple where possibly Alexander the Great decided to visit the Oracle Amun. And then journeyed back to Cairo Museum, of course, a few other sites there, and then journeyed out to the Fayum to see the mud brick pyramid of Senusret I. Back to Luxor on the overnight train, and then eventually landed back in Luxor itself, fly home. So that was my first trip. And I loved visiting these sites, but there were no information boards. So the sites themselves were absolutely silent. And it got me thinking that if I was to go again, then I would need a workbook of some kind to help me get around these temples and tombs so I could understand what I was actually looking at, so I could engage with the archaeology. I was a family man, and between 1988 and 89 I studied for a CMS in management and an HNC in business and finance. I was running a business, I was bringing up children, I was a husband or partner at that time, and my sights were firmly set on being a chartered accountant. Then unfortunately the pound crashed in the European exchange mechanism. Interest rates hit 15-16%, and I couldn't get a work placement to do my ACCA level 3 and 4 chartered accountant exams. So that had to be put on hold. And while that was being put on hold, I went back to Egypt for another trip. And I've made quite a few friends over there by this time, and one of them, who was a journalist, and another who worked at the Cairo Museum, said, "Why don't you teach about ancient Egypt back home in the UK? Because you know as much as we do, and you've obviously got a passion for this subject." So why don't you try teaching ancient Egypt in the UK? So I came back to the UK and made inquiries with several adult education centres, and I went about teaching ancient Egypt as a subject in adult education. So that was from sort of 1990 onwards. And I can remember my first class was around about 37, 38 students. In adult education, the full class is regarded as being 14, 15. I had no experience that this class should be split into two groups. And I can remember walking in there and seeing all these faces and thinking, oh my goodness. And I could feel a bead of sweat running down my spine. And I thought, I'm either going to get through this, and by the time that bead of sweat reaches the bottom of my spine, I'm either in the classroom still teaching, or I've run out the door. Luckily, I stayed in the classroom. The 10-week class was a real success. And it wasn't just that centre, I was also teaching at another centre in Stenning, and then eventually in Worthing and all over East and West Sussex. 6 years later, I decided that all these students that I'd encountered with this passion for ancient Egypt really needed a focus. So I promoted the Sussex Egyptology Society with my own money as a study day, created a programme of lectures, worked out how much a membership should be per year, and created the Sussex Egyptology Society. At that time, around about 96, 97, I was involved with the Open College Network. A lot of my students wanted an accreditation for the courses that they were doing with me. So I was doing roughly 6 courses on 2 different levels, and they wanted to get some accreditation for it. So in 1997, I started the Sussex College of Ancient Egypt. Now, the reason why I started this organisation was again to provide lecture opportunities and day schools. So a lecture opportunity for a member was to come along on a Saturday afternoon between 2 and 4 and listen to a lecture from a distinguished archaeologist. A day school was when you had maybe 1 or 2 or 3 archaeologists who came along who specialised about particular subjects. So I started doing these day schools, which were really, really popular, along with expeditions to Egypt. Now, an expedition would be a 7-day trip with me to either the pyramids or the temples in Luxor. Everyone had a workbook, everyone had aims and objectives, everyone came along to a workshop before they went to Egypt to know exactly what they're going to see, how old these sites were, who were the elites who built them or maintained them, and what the purpose of the sites were for, so that there could be really good engagement once the student was on site. And these were very, very successful trips. And before I know it, I was running 3-4 a year. There was high demand, and they're very, very successful. The year before, in 96, I was asked by a school in West Sussex to come along and just chat to the children about ancient Egypt. At the end of my time in the school, I realised that what I had delivered was a great lecture for adults, but a terrible lecture for children, and that started the schooling. And schooling eventually became an interactive workshop on ancient Egypt with a handling collection and role plays covering kingship and landscape and the gods and the afterlife and burial and mummification and that sort of thing. Then schooling from that time onwards for the next 14 years developed a Greek workshop and a Roman workshop and reached around about 50,000 children. And that was really important for me at the time, because children were giving me questions that I didn't know the answers to. So I was always researching, always in research mode, trying to find out more information. and it was a really good experience. During this time, I did my certificate in teaching with the City and Guilds, and that again helped me to focus on learning objectives and also how to write really good courses with really good learning outcomes, always thinking about public engagement and how important it was to take this subject, which from the 1920s onwards had been mysteriously kept within an elite society within the UK. Not many books were published. Most of the books could only be accessible from public libraries, and they were quite dated. And what I wanted to do was to make this information accessible to the public. In 2002, I was informed by a distinguished archaeologist that there was an Egyptian collection in the Bexhill Museum, and it was unpublished. So I went along and offered my services to photograph the collection and research it. When going through the Ascension Register, who did I come across but Sir William Matthews, Flanders Petrie, and that started my Petrie experience. Anyone who researches ancient Egypt will always come across William Matthews, Flanders Petrie's work, and of course his wife Hilda Petrie, who assisted him and in many cases did some fine archaeology work herself. What I got out of it was amazing, because I found out how Petrie funded the British School of Archaeology. He went round the museums and the universities. Now, for £5, you could get, in those days, you could get a nice box of artefacts for supporting the expeditions. £30 got you something amazing. And there are quite a few amazing things in the Brighton Museum collection, which they only paid £30 for. And it did give me a really good insight into how archaeology was funded going back in those Victorian days. Well, the Bexhill experience made me realise that I had by that time roughly 10 years of ideas about the value of objects and how to interact with the monuments and that sort of thing. So I needed to explore this within an academic framework. So I applied to University College London, the Institute of Archaeology, went up there and had a chat with Dr. Jeffries about what I've been doing, and he suggested that I try the MA route in Egyptian archaeology. So I signed up for the MA in Egyptian archaeology, and I chose the right subjects for that year, so I could be at university for 2 days for my 6 lectures, and then I had the other 3 days in a week to do my schooling, and on the weekends I could write the assignments. It was really full-on archaeology, and I loved it. I can remember going up and down London with 2 suitcases full of books that I borrowed from the Institute, and they were all publications on Petrie's work, and it was just amazing being drowned in this archaeology. Just an amazing time. So I published the Bexhill Museum collection through a dissertation in my qualifying year at the Institute of Archaeology. Professor Tate at that time advised me that what I'd been doing with my Egyptian archaeology was public engagement, and I should really look at public archaeology as my MA degree. So I had a chat with the course coordinator, Tim Shadler Hall, and I transferred onto his course, and then he took this guy who specialised in ancient Egypt and Mediterranean archaeology and drowned me in British archaeology. And we went on some of the most amazing field trips in the UK that I've ever been to. Took us to Dorset to see an an Ice Age burial. Took us up to Argyllshire, where possibly the first King of Scotland was buried, then an open air museum in Northumberland, and all these amazing places, of course Stonehenge and Aylesbury and all those sorts of places. I had a absolutely fantastic time, and a deeper understanding of public engagement and how to help the public engage with objects especially. And that brought me to agency and the different steps in agency that you can recreate the past and present to the people today. So in 2005, I completed my education at the Institute of Archaeology, University College London. I was offered an associate tutor's place at the University of Sussex. Worthing College contacted me in 2005 and asked me to take over the AS Archaeology course because the course tutor was taking maternity leave. I'd never worked with 16 pluses before. They'd always been adults or primary school children, and it was really interesting to engage with these young people and their ideas of what they thought archaeology was about. 2005 onwards was developing Greek and Roman workshops even further, with more handling collections, more role plays, more objects for the children to handle and try on and that sort of thing. Most of them were replicas because I didn't have access to museum collections, and really in schooling you're better off with replicas because lots of accidents do happen. Then 5 years later in 2010, that's when things started going downhill really in archaeology. 2010, the University of Sussex closed their department, and in 2015 the national curriculum changed, which killed off my schooling overnight. That was 25 years and I'd had a really good run, and I decided it was time to retire. And then in 2020 one of my sons came to visit me from Thailand, and he convinced me that the project which I was going to get involved with 5 years earlier could now be a reality if I used video instead of an app. So in 2015 my idea was to develop an app which you could use on an archaeology site to get information for public engagement. The problem is most of the countries that I worked in didn't have Wi-Fi connection out on these sites, and it certainly wouldn't be strong enough to use away from the sites either. So I shelved that idea. But in 2020, with the progression of smartphones, you can actually download videos onto your phone. So I thought this would be a really good idea to see if you could use video, digital video, in archaeology. And so from 2020 onwards, I've been involved in the archaeology video projects. So I started off with this idea that you could make videos which you could upload to the internet, and in my case YouTube, because YouTube do offer the platform free to their users, and people could download those videos onto their phones and use those videos as they went round the archaeology sites. So that was my idea. Then I thought to myself, well, smartphones have GPSs. What would happen if an archaeologist, a field archaeologist, made a video of his dig as a summary, loaded it up to the internet, and then if anyone anywhere in the world punched up their GPS coordinates on their phone to see if anyone had published a video about that very same spot in that part of their world. Wouldn't that be a fantastic idea? Especially if it linked in with a big platform like Google. So that's one of the ideas of the archaeology video project, is to get enough interest, probably not for me, but for people in bigger archaeology organisations to interface with a platform like Google to see if they would take the videos on board. Can you imagine, you use your Google Maps and it tells you exactly wherever you are what archaeology digs have been done in that part of the world, and you could upload those videos straight onto your phone. That is public engagement at its very best. Why is digital archaeology so important? Well, archaeology, really, modern archaeology, is about 150 years old as a science. And at that time, people were not travelling abroad, they had limited information, not many people could read and write, so I'm talking about the masses here, not the elites. And their public engagement was going along to a museum and seeing these objects on display. And an object on display would say how old it was and where it was found and in which country. And that's great for an audience 150 years ago. But now we have a very sophisticated audience. They've got access to information all over the world, and they need to focus on the way that their learning style, which is visual. So they're visual learners. So using their phones to communicate with people, to upload videos and that sort of thing. And that's why I think the archaeology video project can work, because it's the same visual learning style that people today are using. So this brings me to the end of my inaugural lecture as Professor of Public Archaeology for the Sussex College of Ancient and Classical Archaeology. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.